Welcome into the first ever game day edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. John Alden with you as always. Happy Friday. Hope you've had yourself a wonderful week. I'm looking forward to getting the weekend started here on a Friday as Indiana football kicks us off here on a Friday night. Obviously, for those who may be unfamiliar with this new day and age of college football, sometimes your team plays on a Friday night as opposed to a Saturday. And that's exactly what the Hoosiers will do when they take on FCS level Western Illinois at 7 o'clock tonight on the Big Ten Network. We'll get into a little more of that as we get further into the show. Drew Rosenberg of HoosierIllustrated.com is going to join us today instead of our man, Alec Lasley. Alec was unfortunately unable to join me as I was recording this morning, but we will revisit with him later on next week. But very happy to have Drew Rosenberg make his debut on In Touch with Indiana Sports. And we had a really great conversation about all things football as the Hoosiers get ready to take on the Leathernecks. The Leathernecks, man, what a great mascot name. I love lower level college mascots, really any sport, or really it doesn't have to be college is what I'm getting at, but love the unique mascot names. Leathernecks is a good one. But yeah, Drew's going to come on, talk with us about that. Also a little bit of basketball recruiting as well as a little fantasy football talk. Normally I do that with Kyler Staley, but last night with the NFL kicking off, obviously that also kicked off the fantasy football season. And for those of you who have been around since the beginning of this show, you know that this is my first year participating in fantasy football. And I was kind of all over it. I don't want to say I was obsessing over it, but it's kind of fun to track your roster and just see who's doing well. I had Isaiah Pacheco last night playing for the Chiefs, of course, and he did well enough for me. So excited to see what the rest of my weekend looks like when it comes to how some of my players perform. I've got Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, kind of a 1-2 punch that if the Bengals are doing well, could bode well for me and my team. And for all you Indiana fans, a little inside, a little behind the scenes action, I guess. I've named my team Sigged Up, obviously in reference to Kurt Signetti and just, having a little fun with it. So, and speaking of behind the scenes, I want to let you guys in on a little secret. I have recorded, or I should say, tried to record this intro segment more than 10 times today. And I don't know if that's something I should admit, but for some reason, today when I came and sat down, turned on the microphone, hit record, I would get a few minutes into doing this segment, and all of a sudden, I would lose my train of thought. I would get in my own head. I would get a text message notification that would throw me off. And whenever you're recording something and it's not live, and maybe it happens when you're live too, I've only ever really experienced it whenever I'm just pre-recording stuff, because you have that ability to start and stop if you don't like something that, maybe the way I said it or something was not the way I wanted it to get across. And when you're not far enough in the recording to do an edit, it can drive you to just want to scrap the entire thing. Well, I made that mistake today as I was recording today's show. And it's one of those things where if you go down that path, it can be hard to get yourself back on the saddle. And when you start and stop and start and stop, and this goes for anything, not just recording. This just happened to be what I got caught up doing because obviously this is my career of choice, if you will. But it can be very frustrating and taxing to sit there and tell yourself that it's not good enough and you have to redo it and redo it and redo it. And a friend of mine, Nick Coffey, who I work with in the afternoons, he told me that one of the hardest things about pre-recording is knowing that you can restart. It's a good thing, but at the same time, you can get in your own head and never make any progress. And, that was just I made that mistake today. But we're here, we're rolling, we're feeling good. I'm excited about the weekend ahead. And again, excited for some more football. And as always, I've been talking about the fall weather, the upcoming fall season coming up. And normally I'm not a big, put your decorations out early kind of guy. And I'm not personally, but I also used to have a problem with people who would put decorations out a lot earlier than would be traditionally acceptable, if that makes sense. Like, for example, especially around Christmas time, I know there's a large sector of people that love to put out their Christmas decorations on November 1st. And while I'm not the type of person who likes to do that, it would just drive me insane if I would, let's just say, pull out of my neighborhood on the 1st of November and on my way to, I don't know, into town, into work, whatever it may be, I see 3 or 4 houses who already have their entire Christmas decoration set out on their lawn. And I've noticed the same thing now, more so this year than in years past, with Halloween decorations. I think I mentioned maybe a week ago that I saw in late August the first set of Halloween decorations, and it wasn't a lot. It was just a jack-o'-lantern or two on somebody's porch, and that's barely decorations. That's more of an aesthetic than anything else, I guess. But as soon as September 1st hit, I guess it was this past weekend, Labor Day weekend, I've now seen at least 2 houses, one in my neighborhood, one in my town, but not in my exact neighborhood, that have already unloaded their entire plethora of Halloween decorations. And while I do think it is ridiculous, I also kind of like it at the same time. Like, the ridiculous is the side of me that says I would never do that, because Halloween is still what, 6-7 weeks away. It's like, not the leaves are barely changing. It's not even officially fall yet. But there are a couple of houses that they've already got the ghost blow ups out. They've got like the caution tape. They've got some of those Halloween style projectors. And then there's another house. And this one, I'll be honest though, I love the, like, how well they do creepiness, and I hope I do the house justice when I explain what it looks like or what they do with it. But there's a house where I live in Mount Washington, and I can't think of the exact street that it's on, but there's a house with kind of a black gate in their front yard. And I don't know if this gate's out there year round, but inside the gate, there's maybe 4, 5, or 6 big pumpkin humanoid like creatures that this family, whoever lives there, has already placed out onto their lawn. And it is one of the most disturbing Halloween decoration sets that I see annually in my neck of the woods. So, but I guess, long story short, I enjoy viewing them and taking them in, but I'll never be that person that decorates too early. Now, my wife, she's more on the end of the spectrum where she likes to decorate early. Now, not so much with Halloween, but she's more of a Christmas decorator. And thanks to her, we decorate more often or earlier now, more so than I would if I were living by myself, of course. But I would say we typically put up our Christmas decorations around either the week before the Thanksgiving at the earliest, and then ideally, I usually think once after. Again, this is just the OCD in me. Like, we got to get past Thanksgiving first. And I know a lot of people say that shouldn't matter, and it shouldn't. You're right, it shouldn't matter. But the part of my brain that says we got to get through Thanksgiving before it can officially be Christmas, sometimes it takes over. But I've learned to be a little more lax on it, because I enjoy a nice Christmas tree. I like having it in the house, and I like the positive energy that it brings. So that's my little spiel on putting out decorations early. And if you're somebody who enjoys that, I'm not shaming you at all. I'm just telling you that I enjoy seeing what you guys do and the creativity that some people come up with. But I just can't imagine people thinking, I mean, I get, maybe you know what it is. It's just their way in saying, you know what, I need it to be fall. Kind of like me saying I needed college football to be here was another sign that fall was coming. Maybe this is their way of saying, you know what, I'm sick of the summer. Let's move forward. I'm going to manifest making it the fall season by putting out my Halloween decorations the beginning of September. And to that, I say kudos. All right. Where we go from here? I mentioned a little bit about the NFL, man. So I didn't take in a ton of the Chiefs Ravens game. I did follow along with it for fantasy purposes, but man, what a wild finish we had with the Ravens getting a touchdown waved off that would have given them the opportunity to tie the game with the reigning is it 2 or 3 times Super Bowl champions Kansas City Chiefs. And with the touchdown being called off, they obviously caused a little controversy, and the chaos is back. And that's what we love about NFL football, college football, all that kind of stuff. So it's unfortunate for the Ravens. And, that's just the way things go sometimes. But it's here. The NFL's back. And tonight we'll have some more NFL action if you're not watching the Indiana-Western Illinois game. Or maybe you're an Indiana fan, you weren't planning on watching that game in particular anyway because it's an FCS opponent. Maybe you're going to take in a different college football game. But there's also going to be another NFL game on tonight. It'll be in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Sao Paulo, Brazil, as the Packers take on the Eagles in what has become a frequent affair with the NFL where they travel overseas to different countries. I don't know if they've done this. I know they do it fairly regularly. I don't think they do it every week of the season, obviously, but there's more games now than there were before overseas and in different parts of the world, like Brazil, Mexico. They do games in Europe all the time. And it's kind of cool to see that. But at the same time, I don't know. For some reason, it doesn't have the same charm to me as, the college football games whenever they go over to Ireland and that kind of stuff. I don't know what it is that for some reason, it feels different to me and I don't like it. And saying I don't like it, that sounds really pretentious for some reason, especially the way that I just said that. So it really doesn't matter. I'm just sharing my opinion. And yeah. And I have Jake Elliott on my fantasy team, by the way, on the Eagles, their kicker. And so hopefully he gets some opportunities to kick some field goals tonight. Win or lose, I don't care, but kick some field goals. I'll take that any day. So another thing with the NFL, Patrick Mahomes, and I feel like this might have been said for really just you don't want to make the Swifties angry, right? And so someone had asked Patrick Mahomes something about Taylor Swift the other day, and he had mentioned that Taylor Swift had apparently been drawing up some plays, and that maybe at some point this season they'll crack open one of them, or give it a shot and see what happens. And I'm just wondering what type of, and this isn't a thing about Taylor Swift, like this isn't against her, but like what could Taylor Swift or anybody in that same world draw up that somebody else couldn't draw up? There's only so many things you can do in football, unless you just do, I guess, something that's barely a football play. Like, I don't even know what you would do, but maybe it's a trick play that's, I don't know, like Mahomes to Kelsey. But again, Mahomes throws touchdowns to Kelsey all the time. So like, isn't all of that just a Taylor Swift play? So I don't know. Maybe he like he's like smooches the ball as he's throwing it. And as Travis Kelsey's catching it in the end zone, he catches the kiss while he's catching the football. I don't know. So I don't know. It was just funny that I can't remember the exact question he was asked about Taylor Swift, but I'll tell you what, he's doing a great job at just embracing the fact that she is unofficially a part of their franchise. And, kudos to them. I don't really have as big of a problem with Pat Mahomes as some people do. I had a much bigger problem with Tom Brady and the dynasty that he created with the Patriots. And I don't know why that is, but something about Patrick Mahomes, maybe it's because I'm old enough to kind of see the Patrick Mahomes era from start to finish. At the same time, I don't want them to win the Super Bowl again, but I just don't mind seeing them succeed the way that some people do. But again, not everybody really is in favor of the whole dynasty thing. And again, I'm not either. A lot of people didn't like the Warriors dynasty in the NBA or the Miami dynasty whenever LeBron James and company were down there. So it's not for everybody, the whole super team thing. And in the NFL, you can't really build super teams. You kind of just get a little lucky with the talent you can bring in every so often because there's not as much shifting around as there is in the NBA, it feels like. So what else am I looking forward to with the NFL this weekend before we bring in our man, Drew Rosenberg of HoosierIllustrated.com? Let's take a look at the Colts. Colts they're heading to not Arizona. That's where my wife's Bills are going. But the Colts will begin their campaign against the Texans, the team that they ended their campaign with last year in the playoffs. CJ Stroud, man, is he the future of the NFL? Because he obviously did very well for himself last year and looked really good against the Colts in the playoffs. And a lot of actually, I tried drafting him on my fantasy team. So, and here's the other thing: will the Colts be able to, or really, what I should say, will Anthony Richardson be able to stay healthy this year? And if so, will he be anything that he was really built up to be out of college? Because I will say this: a lot of people were underwhelmed when the Colts drafted Anthony Richardson. A lot of people thought there were some better options out there on the table, and myself included. I thought maybe Will Levis would have been a nice fit for the Colts, and obviously he had some early success down with the Titans. But I'd like to see Anthony Richardson succeed, and I believe you've got Joe Flacco as your backup QB, so that's not necessarily a bad thing to have somebody like him behind Anthony Richardson if something were to happen to him injury-wise once again. So it'll be interesting to see if the Colts can get off to a good start. Obviously, like I said, a lot of hype surrounding CJ Stroud and company down there in Houston. But the Colts need to, it's been a while since they've really taken a big step forward. It feels like we're so far removed from the days of Peyton Manning, and we really are. And even the early years with Andrew Luck, where it seemed like there was a lot of promise there, and then all of a sudden he decides to just up and retire. And I know he suffered some injuries, and I've heard people say before the NFL stands for not for long. And if you sustain enough injuries, that's eventually going to take a toll on you in more ways than one. So I don't necessarily blame him for backing out. It just seems like it deflated all of the energy that was around the Colts franchise once he really couldn't stay healthy anymore. And it's been tough getting the Colts back afloat to where fans want them to be. And they're hoping that Anthony Richardson can do that for them this year. And, I'm hoping the same. I've said this before on the show. It's tough for me to get emotionally invested into a pro team at this point in my life. I used to be a very casual Indianapolis Colts fan whenever I was younger, because that's who my grandpa rooted for. My Gramps. Whenever I refer to him, I'd like to be able to refer to him as Gramps, because that's what I've always referred to him as. I believe I told a story that involved him a couple of weeks ago, talking about an Indiana baseball trip before. But a lot of my sports fandom comes from him, including the Indiana Hoosiers, and especially the Indiana Hoosiers, I should say. But also briefly was a casual fan of the Colts during that same time whenever I was an IU fan. But you can maybe this isn't true for everybody, but for me, all of my energies, the way I divide them up, it can't all go towards sports. At least that's, I guess, the way that I am. And so the truly passionate, fandom energy and that type of stuff for me almost exclusively goes to the IU stuff. And I get excited about other teams, the Pacers and that type of stuff. I really enjoy watching Lou City Soccer down here in Louisville. But I feel like it's healthy to divide your energy up in different ways and not always be wrapped up in or only have it in sports. And if you are somebody that does that, that might have came off as judgy. I don't mean to be like that. I've just learned that for me, it's a lot healthier to divide it up differently. Because back when I was younger, man, I was a very unhealthy IU fan in particular. I would obsess over everything, especially when it came to Indiana basketball. I remember during the 2013, was it 13? It was the year that Indiana shared the Big Ten men's basketball title with Ohio State or something along those lines. I don't remember who they shared it with, but it was the season where they cut down the nets after a loss to Ohio State. And I remember that specific moment in particular. I was sitting in my parents' living room watching that game play out. And I remember when they didn't win to clinch the Big Ten outright, I believe. I remember being so mad, like to the point of tears. And so I remember like my mom was watching the game with me. I believe my stepdad was there as well. I can't remember. I don't remember all the details, but I just remember in hindsight, and I don't remember how soon after the initial moment that I realized it, but I just remember like kind of being embarrassed of myself. And again, it's okay to be a passionate fan. I'm not saying that it's not okay to be upset when your team doesn't pull through the way that you want them to. But for me, that was when I realized, I guess, how unhealthy fandom can be at certain stages of your life. And especially when you're young. Again, I was in high school. High school is another whole different animal too when you're going through that type of stuff with the emotions and that type of thing. So again, hopefully that's not TMI. I just thought I'd share. I'm sure my parents, if they happen to be listening to this, they'll recall that moment as well. Because man, I could get angry. I remember I'd have family members saying they were going to give me one of those foam bricks to throw at a TV or throw around if I was ever angry. I'd never break anything. I never broke a TV or anything like that, but I would slam my fist on the ground. I would do so many things. So didn't really expect to get into that part on today's show, but it's okay. I don't mind veering off topic like that sometimes. So yeah, looking forward to seeing what else happens in week 1 of the NFL. And then we'll get into some more college football stuff here on the other side after we speak with Drew Rosenberg. I'm going to go ahead and let that play here in just a moment. So without further ado, here's our man introducing for the very first time on this show, Mr. Drew Rosenberg. Joining me now from HoosierIllustrated.com is the one, the only Drew Rosenberg, making his debut on In Touch with Indiana Sports. Happy Friday, my friend.
Hey, Sean, happy Friday. Been looking forward to making the debut on the show. Excited to be here.
Glad to have you. Bit of a little unexpected situation. We thought Alec Lasley was going to be on with us today. He had something come up this morning, but glad to have you in the bullpen. Glad to have you making your debut. I know we did the kind of crossover episode on your and Kyler's podcast a couple of weeks ago for the Indiana football preview. Had a great time with that. But now I'm excited to bring you on. We'll talk a little football, maybe a little basketball, maybe go all over the place. But I'm excited to have you on today.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Always nice to have a little Hoosier Illustrated Indiana in touch with Indiana sports crossover.
So obviously Indiana football on a Friday tonight, something that typically happens once a year. And thankfully, I feel like for Indiana, it typically falls on one of these early weeks for college football. And you got the FCS Western Illinois. There's not a lot of hype surrounding the matchup itself, but it's definitely going to be an opportunity for Indiana to continue to kind of move without the training wheels, so to speak, now that you're in actual game situations and stuff like that. What's probably the big thing you want to see from week 1 to week 2 as Indiana takes on the Leathernecks tonight?
I think it's penalties. And it was kind of a big issue in week 1. I think it was 9 total penalties for Indiana against FIU, and they lost 80 yards off them. A couple drive killers and drive extenders on the opposite side of the field. So I think you really need to clean that up, especially moving forward, because you can get away with that against the Florida International, Western Illinois. But then once you play UCLA, Maryland, get into the teeth of the Big Ten schedule, having 8-9 penalties and losing 90 yards from them, it's not a recipe for success.
Yeah, and especially whenever you think about tonight's game specifically, if you can play as clean of a game as possible, keep the roster as healthy as possible, that's probably best case scenario before you move on to UCLA and travel out west next week. Because if you're able to kind of, as you mentioned, minimize the penalties and play, I don't want to say a near perfect game because it's hard to expect that from any college football team in week 2, especially an Indiana football team that's getting used to a new regime with Curt Cignetti. But if you want to kind of take that next step forward and kind of show fans that you're going to continue to take steps in that right direction, I think that's probably the best case scenario whenever you're thinking about what you want to see tonight. And also, one thing that I've kind of mentioned that I don't want to say it's the most important thing, but one thing that would really kind of put the icing on the cake. I know Indiana wasn't able to get that shutout against FIU last week. This opponent in Western Illinois, coming off of a season last year where they were 0-11, and I believe they played their week 1 matchup this year against Northern Illinois, obviously a team from the MAC. They didn't do too well in that game. I don't remember the exact score, but this is definitely an opponent where it would be nice if you can, especially defensively, take that next step forward. If you can get that shutout, it just adds a little icing on the cake to what should hopefully be a really fun night if you're watching this game.
Yeah, definitely. I think a big thing for that, we saw one turnover Indiana force, I think interception in the fourth quarter.
Yes,
Western
Marty
Illinois, if you
Farrell
look
got that for him.
exactly, you go to that Northern Illinois Western Illinois game. It's a little surprising. I mean, Northern Illinois dominated every aspect of the game: 700 total yards, 300 rushing yards, 394 passing yards, zero forced turnovers from Western Illinois. It's something I want to see Indiana do. I mean, it's going to be a big part of the team. I mean, you look at years past, the best years. I'd say 2020 was the best team Indiana's had in a while, and the reason for that success, in my opinion, a lot of it was the turnovers. They're one of the best teams in the country when it came to forcing turnovers, and you have to be able to force turnovers because it gives your offense. It can give that like a lifeline to your offense when you're playing some of the tough defenses in the Big Ten, which is going to come later in the season.
Yeah, and that was definitely Tom Allen's calling card whenever he was brought on to the Indiana football staff initially by Kevin Wilson back whenever, I guess that would have been 2016, 17, something around that time. His big thing was, and I know he used the term takeaways. He didn't like the term turnovers, and that's totally fine. Everybody, I guess, has their own preference when it comes to that type of a thing. But that was really Indiana's identity whenever Tom Allen was, the man in charge here at Indiana. But one thing that I do think, whenever we've heard Brian Haynes talk, Indiana's new defensive coordinator, he's obviously not a Tom Allen type, but he has mentioned before that he does want to be aggressive. He does want to, go for the quarterback. And we saw Aiden Fisher and a few other guys get to the quarterback last week. And I think there will be plenty of opportunities, especially when you're playing a low-level opponent like Western Illinois. You're probably going to see Indiana get a couple of turnovers tonight. And if they do, they do. If they don't, they don't. But you're definitely they're going to have those chances. And whether or not they can execute whenever those opportunities are presented to them, that's really where we're going to find out if, I guess Indiana's up to that challenge. It's a good thing to build upon as you get into more tough opponents. As we talked about UCLA coming up in week 3, that'll be something to keep an eye on this week.
Yeah, definitely. I also, what other thing I really want to see Indiana do on the offensive side of the ball, I want to see him push the ball downfield more. We really didn't see that in week 1. Curtis Rourke, I mean, the longest completion of the game was a broken play, 30 yards. It seemed like they took a shot play, but Rourke ended up getting sacked on the play when they were dialed it up. I want to see Curtis Rourke push the ball downfield because Indiana has the weapons to attack teams down the field, and they really didn't do that week 1.
That's true. And the other big play that we really saw, I don't think it's a play that anybody was really expecting, but when Elijah Green got that run up the middle with only a couple of minutes remaining and didn't get touched. I mean, I'm not saying that it was the caliber of opponent that caused. I mean, I know it's part of it, but that was something that we really weren't expecting in general. And to see that happen for the run game, obviously we want to see that with Curtis Rourke as well. And I don't really think Indiana was playing conservative last week necessarily. I mean, we did see them open up the play, but we saw Tyson Lawton throw a pass, even though it was a play that didn't end up working out too well for him specifically. But I would like to see Indiana take a few more shots. And I do think we'll see that. I don't know if it'll be early on. I don't know if it'll be more so as we kind of see the game go along. But here's one other thing I want to keep an eye on too in this game. If this, especially in the first half, if things are going swimmingly for Curt Cignetti and the Hoosiers, it wouldn't surprise me if by the midway through the third quarter, we see a guy like Taven Jackson come in and take over the reins. And not even just him, but you see more of the 2s and 3s play more minutes and get some snaps than you would typically expect, because this is one of those games where, as we mentioned at the beginning of this, you want to keep everybody healthy. You want to play a clean game. And this is also a really good opportunity to get some of your guys who won't be getting as many reps throughout the major part of the season. This is their moment to kind of get some snaps and getting some real game action before things really ramp up here later in the season.
Yeah, it's college football. You got to be able to develop the young talent, and Cignetti brought in a bunch of young guys, and it's something you really need to see moving forward, because it's not a one year season. It's not a 1 year job. Part of it is Rourke is not going to be the quarterback next year. I mean, you mentioned Taven Jackson. It's probably going to be either him or Tyler Cherry next year, if I had to guess. But with Cherry being likely a redshirt freshman, we'll see if he ends up redshirting this year. Could just be a sophomore. You probably are going to want to go with the more experienced Taven Jackson and giving him as many reps as possible. And like even a game like this, Western Illinois, where Indiana should be comfortably ahead, it's just something more to help him grow and I guess help him shake off, some of the habits and stuff that built up when you're running a tough offensive system like he was last season.
Yeah, and I've heard Curt Cignetti mention a couple of times that ideally he would love to have his quarterbacks, and probably multiple positions as well, be a couple of years apart from each other. And, that obviously checks out whenever you're looking at the fact that Taven Jackson will have 2 years of eligibility left next year. And then Tyler Cherry, or even somebody like Alberto Mendoza potentially behind him. I'm sure Tyler Cherry is the guy everybody expect to kind of eventually take the reins down the road. But then you also got to factor in, will Indiana utilize the transfer portal for another quarterback? I mean, that's not necessarily out of the question, I don't think, but either way, that's stuff that is way far down the road, but we're just talking a little bit of depth here. What's, I guess, one more thing, if you have anything else, I guess, like closing thoughts on what to expect from Indiana tonight, what would be considered, a step in the right direction? I know we talked about penalties, but is there anything else that maybe comes to mind if fans are going to continue to be excited as they move forward in the season, especially with a big matchup like UCLA next week? What's the biggest takeaway that would be positive for the Hoosiers tonight?
I think you'll want to see them obviously win the turnover battle. But mainly on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, you kind of talked about it. It wasn't like they were conservative, but it seemed like they were really playing safer with the lead in the second half. I want to see Indiana be aggressive. Ideally, I mean, we saw them score 31 points. Northern Illinois was able to score 54 on Western Illinois. I think if Indiana should be able to score at least 50 points in this game, that's kind of, I don't want to say if they don't, it's a failure because, if you win 49-0, but Indiana needs to be able to put up points against Western Illinois.
And it's tough. There are times wherever I don't like the FCS opponent. In a year one like this, I think it's good to have it on the schedule, but I honestly was very disappointed whenever they removed Louisville from the schedule last year for multiple reasons. I do have personal ties to that city, considering that's where I live currently, and have always grown up in that area. But at the same time, I understand you want to stack up wins. The one thing that I feel like most people usually talk about, though, with these types of games is that you don't really know what you gain from it. But I do think from Indiana's standpoint specifically, there is a lot to gain when you're still implementing a new system. You're still getting your guys to gel together, especially when you bring in so many from the transfer portal. And I know a lot of them are from JMU and they know each other. But when you have the hodgepodge of Indiana guys, former JMU guys, and then a few others mixed in between, any opportunity you can to kind of, like I said, gel together, build that confidence. I think that's what you're looking for as we get rolling here in week 2 of the Indiana football season. So we'll move forward here. I guess we'll talk a little Indiana basketball here for a couple of minutes. Obviously, I haven't had the chance to talk with Kyler about this week, so I guess I'll ask you, Drew, if you have some thoughts. Braylon Mullins and Trent Sisley. Mike Woodson had an in-home visit with Mullins earlier this week, and I know Trent Sisley, they visited him down in Montverde. Obviously, 2 really big prospects that the Hoosiers are looking at on the basketball side of things. If anything, and again, I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, and forgive me if you don't have the information that maybe I'm asking for, but what can you maybe take away from some of the stuff that took place with that this week?
I think the first thing is, I think it's kind of clear. I mean, you look at Mullins and Sisley. I mean, they've been the 2 guys for Indiana. They've been on the list for as long as I guess I can remember for this recruiting class. It's been them 2 and Jalen Harrelson up at LaLu. Jalen Harrelson also, he visited last weekend, so I don't know if there was a visit to LaLu, but I mean, the recruiting, the period's open now, and I mean, we've seen Mike Woodson and the entire staff is busy. You saw Montverde post something from their practice, and most of the coaches that were there was just a coach. Indiana had the entire staff in to see Sicily, entire staff to see Braylon Mullins, entire staff to go to in Atlanta at overtime to see Bryson Tiller. The staff is moving together. They've been busy, and they're really trying to, I guess, make up for the mistakes of years past where we saw this last year's recruiting class. They had Liam McNeely lost his commitment, and then they were able to kind of save it with a Bryson Tucker late commitment. But I don't think Mike Woodson wants to be waiting for the spring to land his best recruits. I think he wants to get it done early. Yeah,
and let me ask you this, I guess. Whenever it comes to recruiting in general nowadays, one thing I continue to go back and forth with is the importance of freshmen versus the guys you get in the transfer portal. Because obviously, Mike Woodson, he did bring in Bryson Tucker, was kind of a late addition last year. But the biggest thing that really has created the expectations for this upcoming season is what he was able to do in the portal. And it really kind of rejuvenated what people thought this team could be, because before all of that, a lot of Indiana fans were in question, like, what the heck is going to happen with this team next fall? Because it seemed like that there wasn't a lot of I don't want to say effort, but again, at least from the outsider's perspective, a lot of people thought that maybe Mike Woodson wasn't doing his job to the fullest. And I'm not claiming that, but there were a lot of people, especially on the fan side of things, that were just worried that he wasn't doing the job correctly. And I guess, again, back to my original question, when it comes to freshmen versus the portal, what do you think the best way to balance that is in today's college basketball?
I mean, you need a blend. It's Indiana. If you look at just pure talent, they have one of the most talented rosters in the country. But the big question mark is, how are you going to get the cohesion of bringing in 4, 5, 6 key contributors that have never played together, now jumping into Mike Woodson's system? So that's where the difficulty of, bringing in these big transfer classes. And it can work. It definitely can. But I think that you need a blend. You need some freshmen, you need some transfers. And after this season, I believe it's the last year where we're really going to see the COVID year really come into play. So next year with this current recruiting class of Braylon Mullins, Jalen Harrelson, Trent Sicily's class, I think we're going to see freshmen be able to make more of an impact as we've seen in years past, because there isn't that as big of an age gap as there is now between the freshmen and seniors, where you're seeing these 18-year-olds come in and playing against 23, 24-year-olds, where now you're getting the true normal 4-year seniors.
And you almost feel bad for some of the lower level freshmen. I'm referring to mainly like the 3 stars and maybe the low 4 stars, because those used to be pieces where you would bring in and you would expect them to not contribute very much in year one. But at the same time, you knew down the road that they more than likely weren't going to transfer because they would have to sit out, and you would kind of see them develop over the course of a couple of years. Now, whenever you can go find guys that you can just plug and play, it almost, I don't want to say it makes them obsolete, but it makes it a lot more difficult for those guys who, when they are freshmen, to find significant minutes, and it makes it easier for them to quickly jump ship and find a place where they can be more of an impact player nowadays. And I don't blame them for that. It's just, it makes it difficult to, like we said earlier, to find that perfect balance of the roster makeup for your teams and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think especially with the NIL, it makes it even harder because players see what others are earning and they're like, oh, okay, if I play a lot, I can, get more money. And players, I guess the age of loyalty in college basketball is, with even coaches too, it's really gone. I mean, you're seeing coaches tell players you need to transfer out of here. And it happens a lot. You might not see it every day, but it happens a lot. And it's going under the radar a lot of times, but you see that. And then you see players don't really have the same loyalties they do to a coach, where they'd say, okay, I'm going to sit on the bench for 2 years. And then as a junior, senior, step in and play. Now that's all right. I sat my freshman year. I'm ready to play sophomore year. And if they're not going to play, they're going to leave.
Yeah, and again, it kind of goes back. I was thinking about Taven Jackson earlier too. If someone like Tyler Cherry ends up taking the starting role after Curtis Rourke is gone, there's no reason to think that Taven Jackson would stick around anymore, unless he just is okay with being a career backup at the college level. But I'm sure somebody like him, who was at once a player for Tennessee, expected to be potentially in that rotation, didn't work out for him, unfortunately. It's just it's not only is it hard for coaches, it's hard for players to navigate as well. So very good to get your thoughts on all that stuff.
You talked about Taven. I think it's a really good point, because Taven is someone that, when he came to Tennessee, it seemed like he could be a quarterback to play, be the guy junior, senior year. And then Nico happens to commit, who is, a generational quarterback prospect. And that kind of, I think that was a big thing for his, reason to transfer. I mean, the writing was kind of on the wall. You have a guy like Nico, he's not going to sit on the bench very long.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And real quick, before we wrap things up, are you a fantasy football guy?
Definitely. Yep.
Okay. So this is my first year doing it. I've talked with Kyler a little bit about this a few times when he's been on. And for the first time, so I'm not a huge NFL fan. And when it comes to having my own team, I do have players I like to kind of keep an eye on from time to time, but I've never really had a team that I could genuinely get emotionally invested in the way I've done with Indiana throughout my life. Well, with IU specifically is what I'm trying to get at. But I found myself last night a little more interested because it's my first year doing fantasy football. I had Isaiah Pacheco on my team. It was nice to see him get some points for me. But I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on fantasy football and I guess why you like it or how long you've been doing it, that type of thing.
I think I've been doing it since I'm probably 14, 30. I'm 22, turned 23. Okay. I mean, I've been doing it probably most of my life, 14 years at this point.
Wow.
The league I'm currently in with, I mean, it's my childhood best friends. This is the 10th year we've been doing the league. I mean, we have a championship like WWE style belt with like engravings every winter. Like
That's
it's
awesome.
competitive for us. But I guess last night, it's my biggest thing in week one is don't overreact to week one. It's just week one. It's the biggest thing we see every year. People panic. They make really dumb trades or dumb acquisitions. They do stuff because they lost week one. Week one is, yes, it's great to have a great start to the year. I have Travis Kelce last night who laid an egg, 3 catches for 30 something yards. Really disappointing from a guy I'm hoping to be the best tight end in football this year. Am I going to trade Travis Kelce because he had a bad game? Absolutely not. And it's something I think we need to get through our heads that week one is, there's going to be some great games. You're going to see a guy like Xavier Worthy last night, 20 points, great week one. And he definitely could have an unbelievable season, but you don't want to overreact and, trade a great star player for a rookie receiver that had, 3 touches that led to 2 touchdowns.
One thing that Kyler gave me some advice on, especially whenever I was drafting, was to value running backs. Apparently, that's something that not everybody typically thinks of whenever they're thinking about guys who can give them some good points. So we'll see. I'm excited. Obviously, I'll wait for the entire weekend to see how I do, but I like my team. I've got the combo of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. Hopefully, that can help me double up with some points. And, we'll see who else works out for me.
Yeah, it's a nice stack to have. I have that in a league as well. Joe, just hoping Jamar plays. That's my only concern this weekend.
I know. I was a little worried earlier this week because I know he's been worried about his contract and all that type of stuff. But I do think I haven't followed it super closely, but I think that's kind of gotten settled if I'm not mistaken. But I could be very wrong when I say that. I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like it's trending in the right direction. I think Joe Burrow had a comment saying he called Jamar pro and said Jamar's going to play. So that made me feel a lot more at ease.
Good stuff. Drew, appreciate you making your debut here on In Touch with Indiana Sports. Look forward to doing it whenever the next time may be.
Thanks for having me, John. It's always good to be here.
Big thanks to Drew for filling in for Alec Lasley today. We'll definitely visit with him once again as the season goes on, whether it be with football, basketball, all that good stuff. Appreciate him taking the time here on a Friday to chat with yours truly. And let's go ahead and jump into the Big Ten slate for the night. Obviously, or not even for the night, but for the whole weekend. But Indiana will kick off the Big Ten in general as they take on Western Illinois, as we've talked about many a time already. For those interested in the spread, it's currently set at minus 42.5, and the total set at 52.5. Won't be touching that game this time. Indiana, obviously, I took the over with them last week. That didn't work out for me, but they did cover. They barely covered. So do with that with what you will. The other game tonight in the Big Ten, Duke taking on Northwestern on FS1, with Northwestern being 2-point favorites currently. What is it about Northwestern? I know they had that game against Miami of Ohio last week that it's the prototypical Northwestern opener. They look like they're going to lose, and in some years they do lose to a team that should be very inferior to them. And they barely beat Miami of Ohio. I say barely. They looked good with their back against the wall, I should say. And they've had this series going on with Duke now for a few years now. And I would say with this being at home, even though they play in that weird stadium and it's a temporary stadium, and they don't really, I don't really how much of a home field advantage it truly is. I will say the time when that really will be an advantageous field for them is when you get into the colder weather months, whenever you have the wind coming in off of the lake, because they're playing right there. And so it's not an ideal scenario for opposing teams when you're playing and the weather's not very good. Thankfully, when the Hoosiers play Northwestern, it'll be in early to mid-October and not, towards the end of the season in November or something like that. But it'll be interesting to see. Northwestern, I don't know. They should maybe win this night. Again, I don't have a whole lot of thoughts on it other than the fact that it seems like Northwestern, they play the hits, right? They barely beat a team they shouldn't, or they should handle a little more easily. And then you play, it's the battle of the nerdy schools, Duke and Northwestern, right? So we'll see what happens there. Let's move on to Saturday. And not only is this first matchup at noon a big matchup for a Big Ten team, it may be and probably is actually the biggest matchup of the entire weekend for college football. And that is when number 3 Texas comes to town to face the number 10 Michigan Wolverines. Texas currently favored by 7, and I think that's pretty. I wouldn't be surprised if Texas wins, maybe by even more than that. And here's the reason I think that. I don't think Michigan's a bad team. I do think they will naturally take a step back from winning a championship this year. But here's another reason I'm not super confident in Michigan. And I've said this already. I think Sharon Moore is going to be a bum. And I don't think that doesn't mean I think he's a terrible coach overall. I just think it's a lot to ask somebody to fill in for the shoes of a championship winning head coach when that former coach was also kind of sort of a part of cheating. And again, I know it shouldn't matter, and I don't want to spend too much time on that specifically, but Michigan is there's a lot of question marks with Michigan in general when you think about how they got to where they were the past couple of years and where they're going to be moving forward. So again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Michigan takes care of home field and beats Texas and looks really good doing it. Who knows? But Texas and their new QB Quinn Ewers, formerly of Ohio State, I think they're going to do well, even though it is in the big house. So my prediction there, and again, I'm not betting on this game, but I do predict Texas will win that matchup on Saturday afternoon. Penn State at home playing Bowling Green, a good tune-up game for them as they're coming off their victory on the road at West Virginia after that long delay that they had to suffer through. And they will look to move to 2-0 after they face the Bowling Green Falcons on Saturday. Minnesota will try to get their first win of the season as Rhode Island comes to town. Minnesota coming off their loss to North Carolina last week as they lost on, I don't want to say they lost on a last-second field goal, but they had 2 opportunities to win that game on a field goal, 2 separate occasions, not back-to-back, of course. And their Big Ten kicker of the year failed on both of those attempts. One of them a lot closer than the other. So Minnesota looking to right the ship, row the boat, as PJ Flex says. So they'll be looking to right the ship against the Rhode Island Rams on Saturday. And then coming up next, after that, Akron at Rutgers. This is a game that I am betting on, by the way. Rutgers minus 22.5 point favorites against the Akron Zips. And I'm not betting on the total, which is 39.5. But Rutgers, they kind of got screwed a little bit last week. If you bet on, or I should say they didn't get screwed, but you got screwed. If you bet on them, it ended up being a push because when they had a touchdown at the last second and as time expired, whenever you're winning or there's no way to, I guess, there's no reason for the extra point. They don't make them kick the extra point is what I'm trying to say. So that's why you weren't able to see Rutgers cover the spread. But I do think Akron being one of the worst teams in the MAC, Ohio State handled them fairly easily last week. I do think Rutgers will do the same. Maybe not in the exact same fashion as the Buckeyes did, but 22.5 for a Rutgers team that is expected to take a step forward this year. I do think they will do just that. So I'm taking Rutgers to cover that 22.5 point spread. Next game I am also betting on, and I mentioned some of these already, by the way, on Wednesday's episode. So my apologies if you're hearing some of this for the second time. But I'm also taking number 21 Iowa to cover minus 2.5 against Iowa State, the battle for the Cy-Hawk Trophy. I do think Iowa is a lot better this year. And not that Iowa has been bad. They are one of the most consistently good teams in the Big Ten football conference each and every year. But the biggest difference is that they may appear to have a decent offense now. And I know last week was a very tiny sample size against an FCS program like Illinois State. But when you beat a team 40-0, especially when Iowa is used to beating teams like 17-0, 20-0, or, if it was a better opponent, like 21-20, very low scoring games like that. If Iowa can replicate, at least to an extent, what they did against Illinois State this week against Iowa State, their rival, I don't see a reason that they shouldn't handily take care of the Hawkeye or the Cyclones. Because Iowa State, I know that, so they beat North Dakota 21-3. and I'm going to pull up real quick what it is exactly how that game played out, because I feel like if I remember seeing correctly, and for some reason my computer is refusing to help me out so I can go back and look. But Iowa State, there we go. So they played North Dakota, won 21-3. I feel like they struggled in that game a little bit. So the halftime score was 10-3, or excuse me, 14-3. And they never trailed. So maybe it wasn't as contentious as I may have thought it might have been in that game. But 21-3 against an FCS opponent that isn't NDSU, I just think Iowa's going to end up handling business and doing what they normally do, which is beat the Cyclones. And I know a couple of years ago they lost, but this game is at Kinnick. It's another factor. But Iowa also, other than that one loss last year, they've won 7 out of the last 8, something along those lines. So that's why I'm taking Iowa to cover. Maybe I beat around the bush a little too much there and should have just gotten right to it. But moving on, right after that, we got Michigan State at Maryland. Very intriguing matchup, especially with new head coach Jonathan Smith in his first Big Ten action, and Maryland in their first Big Ten action without Talia Tagovailoa. And Maryland looked phenomenal last week in their 50-7 win against UConn. And if Edwards Jr., almost wanted to call him BJ Edwards, I think it might be Billy Edwards. If he can, put up similar numbers, I don't see Maryland having any trouble at all with Michigan State. But again, Michigan State, we have a very small sample size of them too with their brand new head coach, Jonathan Smith. Again, that's why sometimes some of these early games are difficult to really tell how good certain teams are. And Maryland did play a UConn program that is way below the standard of a typical power program. And I know UConn isn't technically in a power conference anymore, but they used to be, even though they're independent now. So Maryland favored by 9.5. That seems right on point of what you might expect. But if I were betting on this game, and I'm not, I would take Maryland to cover that, because it wouldn't surprise me if they win by 2 or 3 touchdowns potentially. So moving on, Eastern Michigan at Washington. Didn't learn a whole lot about one of our new Big Ten brethren last week as they took care of Weber State 35-3. They move up from the FCS level to a G5 opponent in Eastern Michigan, favored by 25 points. Again, seems right on target with a program that is definitely more talented than someone like an Eastern Michigan coming to town. So moving on, some of these games not as exciting to talk about as others, of course, in these early week 2 matchups, because you have a lot of FCS opponents and just teams you don't know a ton about sometimes, including this next one, South Dakota at Wisconsin. No spread that they're showing on this one, and maybe you can't bet on it. Or in some cases, you can just bet later on it. I guess they decide to put a spread out for it, but you don't always get spreads in FCS games, as I mentioned before. But not a whole lot to really talk about here, especially from an Indiana perspective. Wisconsin is not a team that the Hoosiers will face at any point this season. And again, no betting interest as well. So yeah, South Dakota and Wisconsin, if you want to take that in on FS1. Number 19, Kansas at Illinois will be later in the evening. Good test for Brett Bielema as he tries to take a step forward. 2 programs with Kansas and Illinois that have kind of gone back and forth with having decent years in the past. Kansas really riding some momentum the past couple of years with their current head coach. I don't know why his name's escaping me, but this guy was formerly Lance Leipold, formerly at Buffalo. He had Kansas doing pretty well in the Big 12. And again, this is Illinois at home, though, so this will be a good opportunity for them to get a marquee sort of a victory for them. Not betting on this game, of course, but Kansas is favored by -4.5 if you are interested in that spread. Western Michigan taking on Ohio State. And much like Akron last week, not much to really expect here, or, not much exciting to really take in here. So Buckeyes currently favored by 37.5. Will they get off to a faster start? I guess is kind of the big storyline for Ohio State this week, because they were a little slow getting off the ground against Akron. Obviously ended up taking care of business and winning by 30 or 40 or so points when it was all said and done. So the big key here for Ohio State will be they just want to be cleaner from the beginning. And let's move on to one of the more marquee matchups of the weekend for the Big Ten. And it's Hollywood time, baby. It's Colorado and Deion Sanders traveling to Lincoln, Nebraska to take on the Cornhuskers. This is the other Big Ten game that I'm betting on this weekend. Or I guess the third, I should say. Nebraska currently favored by 6. I think I bet on it at around 7.5. I just think Nebraska is taking that step forward this year, and I don't think Colorado showed us much last week. And I know North Dakota State was a good FCS level team, but I don't think Colorado nor Deion Sanders and company have shown us anything outside of Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter that they are ready to be a high-powered football program. And I think Nebraska is closer to doing that than Colorado is. Plus, they're going to have revenge on their mind. They're going to be in a tough environment, or the Colorado will be visiting a tough environment, I should say. And I just see Nebraska. This is kind of their, I don't want to say their breakout game. Some people may see it as that. I guess it really can be viewed however you want, especially if they really blow the doors off of them. And again, beating a Colorado team last year that went 4-8 and may do something similar this year shouldn't be anything to get super ecstatic about. But to be a team that may have kind of an ability to shut up the Colorado football program when they've been kind of a pest when it comes to just, the way that they kind of handle themselves, that would be a good look for Nebraska. And I kind of see things playing out that way. And that's why I'm betting on the Cornhuskers to cover that spread on Saturday. 2 more Big Ten games. Boise State at number 7 Oregon. Oregon struggled last week to put away the Idaho Vandals. And even though Dylan Gabriel had a great game, you would have never expected the score to be as close as it was. I think the final ended up being 24-14, something along those lines. Maybe incorrect. I'm not looking at it right in front of me, but it was very close for a while. And late, the game was kind of in question, which is not something you expect from a team that was number 3 in the country and has been dropped down to number 7 in the country. And Boise State is a team that a lot of the talking heads believe could be the best in the group of 5. So good test coming up for the Oregon Ducks as they play the Broncos at 10 o'clock on Peacock on Saturday. And then rounding out the slate once again for the second week in a row is USC after getting their marquee victory against LSU last Sunday night. They will take on Utah State at 11 o'clock on Saturday on BTN. And it'll be kind of their chance to really tune themselves up against an Aggie squad that will likely not provide much of a challenge for the USC Trojans. So that's a look at your Big Ten slate for the weekend. One more game I'm going to have my eye on, as I mentioned earlier this week, and this is another game that I've decided to bet on. It's number 14 Tennessee at number 24 NC State. And that spread is currently at -10. I bet on it when it was around 8.5, I believe. NC State, for those who may have missed it last week, really kind of struggled against an FCS opponent in Western Carolina, and Tennessee absolutely demolished Chattanooga. I think the score was 69-3, something along those lines. And I've just kind of thought NC State, they're really only getting the love they've gotten because they've got Grayson McCall, formerly of Coastal Carolina, who did really well at the G5 level last year. And, maybe he'll end up being fine with NC State, but I just think they're still kind of getting their feet wet with them. And Tennessee is a far more well-oiled machine than NC State is. And I know it's on the road, but I think Tennessee is going to take that spread by the almost said something I shouldn't have said, but by the reins, I should say. And I think they'll take care of business against the Wolfpack. And again, this is overreaction time, right? We're taking results from week 1, and we're assuming that that's how a team's going to be like for the majority of the season. I could be way off on some of these bets. Feel free to tail me or fade me as you please, because I had a decent finish the last week with the USC money line, but a few of my other picks didn't turn out so well. The UGA pick ended up doing okay, or not even doing okay. It came through for me. They ended up taking care of Clemson very easily. So you win some, you lose some in the world of gambling, especially sports gambling, I should say. And I'm looking forward to taking in some action later this weekend. So I think that's going to wrap it up for a Friday edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports. Also, if you're checking this out before the game tonight, be sure to remember to tune in to our HoosierIllustrated.com post-game wrap-up show. Myself and Kyler Staley will be up late with you, talking all things, recapping the Indiana football result from tonight, and looking forward to moving on to UCLA next week after tonight's game against the Leathernecks of Western Illinois. So tune in to that later on. And if you want, feel free to, as always, send in your thoughts to the voice message number 502-830-9195. We'll take your calls, whether it be on this show or if you want to react to the post game later on tonight as well. So until tonight, and then also on Monday next week, as always, this has been another episode of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.